A media release on February 25th from the Minister for Health and Ageing essentially changed the way that medicines are selected to be listed on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, or PBS. So, before this announcement, what was the process to have medicines listed on the PBS, and what's changed since then?
Well, the process for having a medicine listed on the PBS is a rigorous one. It's well regarded right around the world, and there's quite an extensive process of evaluation for clinical effectiveness and cost effectiveness that various expert committees make for a medicine when a company is seeking to have a medicine listed on the PBS. And that process has been in place for years, and as I say, it's quite rigorous and robust. It can take quite a lot of time and cost companies quite a lot of money. But through that process, at the end, the expert committees, the government's own independent expert committees, make a recommendation to list a medicine. Prior to the 25th of February, if the cost of that medicine was going to be more than $10 million in any one year, that went to federal cabinet for approval. Usually below $10 million a year, the minister was able to just approve its listing on the PBS without cabinet approval. What changed from the 25th of February? Two things occurred. One is that the federal cabinet for the first time explicitly deferred the listing of a number of medicines and vaccines for listing on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. It's the first time federal cabinet has explicitly come out and said, no, we don't want to list them at this time. The other change that cabinet made was, rather than just requiring medicines costing $10 million or more in any one year needing cabinet approval, they've now required all new medicines with any net cost to government needing cabinet approval. So even if a medicine was going to cost $1,000 to government, that now needs to be approved by cabinet before it can be listed on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. So you had two changes effectively. One is that cabinet now wants to scrutinise everything going on the PBS, and secondly, they have signalled that they are prepared to defer the listing of medicines for an indeterminate period. And that's the other thing with this decision, is that there's been no indication of how long this change will occur. They have advised that this is due to the current fiscal situation. There's no timetable as to when these medicines will get listed. So it's caused a lot of uncertainty for the industry, and it made it difficult for companies to bring medicines onto the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme.
This committee you're talking about is the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, who have traditionally chosen what medicines will be listed on the PBS. If all power to list medicines is going to rest with Cabinet from now on, does this make the PBAC somewhat redundant?
Well, it does call into question the value of the whole process, frankly. As I say, Australia has what we call a health technology assessment system, which the PBAC implements, which is recognised internationally as one of the best in the world. It's quite involved, it's quite rigorous, it's quite robust. It's not an easy tick and flick process. The PBAC spends a number of months looking at the clinical data, trying to work out the effectiveness of the medicine from a clinical perspective, looks at economic modelling to determine whether it's value for money for the taxpayer, for the government to subsidise medicine. They look at how a medicine is going to be used in clinical practice, how it interacts with the rest of the health system, potential savings in other parts of the health system. They take into account patient impact statements and cost projections. So it's quite an involved evaluation process of cost effectiveness. And the PBAC has, over the years, developed a well-earned reputation for that scrutiny as an expert committee. So I think that's right. I think for Cabinet to be coming over the top of that and making decisions to list some medicines on the PBS and not others, that adds a whole new layer of complexity and, frankly, uncertainty because it's not clear what expertise or evidence the federal Cabinet has that's leading them to a different conclusion from the PBAC. It's unclear what basis politicians are using to override the expert judgment of their own independent expert committees. And as I say, that causes a lot of questions for companies that are trying to work out how to bring new medicines onto the PBS.
Speaking about these companies, you're from Medicines Australia, who represent the pharmaceutical industry. So what are the implications of this change for your industry?
Well, what it means is that companies that are trying to bring medicines onto the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme now have an additional hurdle they have to overcome. So once they have got through that rigorous evaluation process of the PBAC, and once they've got through the pricing negotiation process, they now have to go through what is essentially a political process at the Cabinet level to convince the Cabinet to have the medicine listed on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. And as I say, there's no clarity or certainty about how that process works or what the time frame around it is. We have companies right now, for example, that have stock in warehouses with expiry dates that is sitting there, and those companies do not know when their medicines will be available to Australian patients. Those companies have also employed staff to help roll out those medicines to doctors and make sure doctors are using them in the most appropriate way. Those staff at the moment are sitting there with nothing to do, and companies are having to bear that. So those companies that have already had medicines and vaccines deferred are having to deal with these issues of uncertainty, plus companies that haven't directly been affected yet but are looking at bringing more new medicines to Australian patients through the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. They are looking at the current situation, scratching their heads and wondering what's going to happen to my medicine and how is it going to be assessed in the future. And I'm already aware of a couple of companies that, if you like, have hit the pause button on bringing new medicines to Australia. They are, if you like, waiting to see how the process unfolds.